podcast brought to you by the New Mexico Boys and Girls Ranches. I'm Heath Cole, doing a little social distancing today, so Ted won't be joining us, but I want to talk today about the fringe. The fringe is when you're kind of on the edges of a spectrum, political spectrum, parenting spectrum, whatever it is. It's the extreme edges of that, kind of not mainstream is the general terminology. It's on the fringe of things. As parents, we can influence whether our kids get to the fringe more than we think that we can. We don't often realize it, but our reactions to things are forming our kids' reaction to things as they grow older. So if you're a fringe kind of person, if you have extremes, and the best way to look at this is ask yourself, do you try to boil everything down to black and white, yes and no, so that you don't actually have to think through something where there's no discernment, there's no gray area, there's no room for interpretation, there's no latitude for grace, those kinds of things? That is a fringe view. And we start this off a lot of times without even realizing it, because we are very dictatorial, or yes or no, or black and white about whether chores are done or homework getting done or grades or those kinds of things. Well, those hardened views start to influence our kids, and they begin to develop their own hardened views, and then those hardened views and our hardened views tend to clash. And a lot of times what you'll see is if a kid is raised in an environment where there is a extreme fringe view on one side, the kid will rebel against that parent with just by having the extreme view on the other side. And then that sets up the battle between the parent and the child. Well, in many cases, the only thing missing is somebody willing to teach the other side of the argument, or teach discernment, or teach how to look at the world for gray. So, for instance, right now, political views are pretty polarized onto the fringe. There's those that hate one side, and there's those that only listen to one side, and there's those that believe everybody on the other side is idiots or morons or sheep or whatever extreme statement you want to make. That fringe view starts to polarize everybody. And as kids watch this, they start to have the same kind of polarization of views, because it's simple to just say, I only do this, or I only do that, and I never do this, and I never do that. And as parents, sometimes discernment is something that we forget to teach. So, for instance, when a child comes home late, if their curfew is 10 o'clock and they walk in at 10:05, the extreme view says, okay, well, you can't handle the responsibility of going out, so therefore you will not go out for 6 months, which is a little bit of an extreme response. So the kid starts to think, okay, well, if I'm 5 minutes late, there's no point in even walking through the process of why I was late, so I will just adapt the same kind of principles to everybody in my life, my teachers, my friends, my parents. And we don't have to let this happen. So if a kid's 5 minutes late, one of the things you can do is ask, hey, I noticed you were a couple minutes late. What's going on? Anything happen? Oh, I got busy doing something and forgot what time it was. It won't happen again. As a parent, you can have the discernment to say, you know what, here's what's going to happen. Your curfew will be 10:25 next time if it was 10:30 this time, whatever. Or you can just say, you know what, we all have these things that come up, and I want you to work really hard to get home on time, but I am not going to overreact to this, and we're going to try to work on being punctual, and we will work on this next time you go out, and I will help you with this a little bit, and we will start planning a way for you to be on time. This is when we start to look at cooperative relationships as opposed to adversarial relationships between parents and children. At the end of the day, we are not trying to be adversarial. I don't think we are. With our kids, we're trying to be cooperative. We're trying to give them the best start in life, and we can make a case that being late is not a good thing. We can also probably make a case for all the times we've been late because of traffic, or because of the restaurant that we were getting takeout from wasn't as efficient as we'd liked it to be. But we tend to forgive ourselves, or to give ourselves some grace and latitude, and then not extend that to kids. And while being late may not seem like a big deal, or being clear on the boundary of being late may be a seemingly an unimportant issue, it starts to develop into a black and white view. What you end up with is kids that start to believe that 99% right is still 100% wrong, which is a fairly rigid view. Now, If you're talking about somebody who's designing a car for safety, maybe that's a good attitude to have. If you're talking about normal living, most people don't live in an environment where you have to be either 100% right or you're 100% wrong. And being able to see the gray or the latitude in areas like whether you get home right on time or not, or whether you are, punctual to a meeting or school, those are two different things, and you can separate them and say, school is like your job, and we're going to work really hard to make sure you're not late to school, because that is something that will affect you for the rest of your life. And then I'm also not going to overreact if you happen to be 5 minutes late. Let's not make a habit about it. Interestingly, there are other things that you can be kind of rigid about, and it's not going to lead to this fringy, extreme view on everything. One of the things that's difficult is if kids borrow a car and they come back with it almost on empty. That could be something you get a little more rigid about. The first thing they got to do the next morning, wake them up early and send them to the gas station to fill up gas. Go with them. What we're trying to do, though, is value the relationship over the rule, or value the relationship as much as the rule. I'm not opposed to rules. I'm not opposed to expectations. In fact, I think they're critical. What I am opposed to is when you decide that all of your stuff and all of your rules and all of your things are more important than your relationship with a child, and then that child starts to develop a set of rules that become more important to them than you are. And then it becomes kind of this battle of wills to see who can be the most unimportant to the other, or who can fight for some kind of importance despite all of the things that are stacked against it. And that's not a healthy relationship for anybody to be in. A lot of times we don't realize that our kids want our approval. They know when they are screwing up. And what they want to do is be able to walk into an environment where it's safe enough to say they screwed up and not have a crucifixion waiting upon them. And a lot of times that means just listening and saying, okay, I get it. I understand. We're going to do better next time. Let's move on. And I, as a parent, recognize that I have not lived a perfect life, and I screw up in front of my kids from time to time, probably more often than I'd like to admit. And being able to own that is also something that we can teach and say, you know what, I screwed up, and here's what I'll do. And so when we start doing that, then kids start saying, you know what, when I screw up, when I'm late, I'm going to start by saying this is what I can do to recognize that I was late and that I screwed up, and then to figure out how to have self-discipline, which is what we're after, isn't it? I mean, if my kids are self-disciplined at the end, I don't have to worry much about the extreme, because they will guide themselves even if I'm not around. And while it's hard to trust that sometimes, that should be our goal. And so if you're one of those people that has these hardline extreme views and you're on the fringe of everything politically, religiously, emotionally, you're just out there on the fringe making everything into a black and white yes or no answer because you don't want to have to think through it, you're going to pass that along to your kids, and that is going to severely limit your relationship with them, but it's also going to start to limit their ability to have relationships with other people. So I encourage you to take a look at your fringe behavior and say, what am I teaching my kids? Am I teaching them to prioritize owning their mistakes and apologizing when they screw up and working towards doing it better the next time and maintaining the relationship all at the same time? Or is you screwed up, you must pay for your sins, the only way you can parent? And that is a parenting style that leads to a set of consequences, and if you're willing to pay those consequences, so be it. But we all have to figure out what it is we're going to focus on. I tend to focus on collaborative, cooperative, let's talk through it. If there's a reason, there's a reason. I'm not going to freak out over somebody being 3 minutes late. I'm also going to teach how important it is to be on time in a business setting or in a job setting. And that's how I'm going to approach that. But you have the choice to decide how you're going to approach it. And the more you think about it, the more you think through it, the better off that approach will be. So I encourage you to think through your thought process on extremes or black and white or the fringe of every issue, and say, am I on this fringe and am I teaching my kid to be the same? Or am I looking at things through the lens of discernment and the fact that we all have circumstances that prevent perfection, and am I offering grace as one of the attributes to my children? So I hope you think about it, and I hope you'll join us next week for another episode of the Raise 'em Up podcast. Thank you.